Hello and welcome to LSBF TV for AAT students worldwide. My name is Paul Merrison. I'm going to be your tutor today for some personal tax. We've got 10 of these TV shows, classes, presentations, fun-filled Fridays, call them what you will, happening on 10 consecutive Friday afternoons, every time in the same time slot. And our tax tutoring team, myself and a couple of colleagues, will be taking you through the various assessments. We'll be doing all 13 tasks from personal tax assessments spread over the 10 weeks. So we've doubled up on some of them so we can squeeze them all in for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Let's get going. So we're going to be doing a personal tax assessment and we're going to start with task number 1. Before we actually do the task, let's take a look at what that task involves. Now, personal tax task 1 is a bit different from tasks 2 through to 13 at the end of the assessment. How so, I hear you ask? Well, the first thing is it is written. You're not going to be selecting things from drop-down boxes. You are going to have to type something. You know, words, sentences that actually mean something useful. So to a certain extent, your communication skills are being tested in this unit. You are expected to provide full sentences and not what I'm doing here, short bullet points. But there is some good news if you're not sure where to start. Because the AAT for all 3 tax units provides reference material that you're allowed to use during the assessment. It will appear on the right-hand side of the assessment screen. Typically it's in blue, and you must make sure before you sit the real thing that you've done some practice assessments, and when you practice one of the assessments, maybe practice it for a second time, but don't do the questions. Just open up the reference material and get used to what is in there and where it is. Now, for this module, personal tax, the reference material comes in 2 types. Because for tasks 2 to 13, you're going to get tax rates, rules, and stuff like that. But we are not doing task 2 to 13. We are doing task number 1. And task number 1 is all about behaviour, ethics, code of conduct. And you are going to be provided with the AAT code of conduct relating to taxation. So when this task gives you a little story and says, what are you going to do about this story? The great news is, even if you think you're sure, you can go and take a look in the reference material and either firm up your ideas, or if you're not sure, give you some ideas of the process that you as a professional should be following. And it will also, I would imagine, give you some useful technical words that you might put in to your answer. Because one thing that they are very much not looking for here, don't simply copy out the reference material. Any fool can copy stuff. Instead of copying it, you have got to apply it to the scenario that you have been provided with. Now, before we get into the scenario and actually go about answering the one we've got here, a little reminder of some of the fundamental principles that make up the ethics that all accountants are expected to abide by. And just in case there's any doubt, my friends, this ethics applies to you as a student. It doesn't kick in when you've passed all your exams and qualified. It kicks into all of you now. And me as well, actually, since I'm a qualified accountant. Right, in terms of ethics, there are 5 fundamental principles. And I like to think of these as PICO. That stands for professional behaviour, integrity, confidentiality, competence and due care, and objectivity. So, what do those various things mean then? Well, let's start in the middle with one that's fairly clear, because we know the word confidentiality from everyday use, don't we? This says you must keep client information private. However, there are some exceptions to the rule, because if the law says you have to report something, then you have to report it. And if you think there is a public interest argument, in other words, what your client is doing would have an implication for society in a more general sense, you know, so your client is poisoning the local river by dumping stuff in it, well, that could affect a lot of people, then maybe the public interest argument is going to apply. But generally, you keep client's information confidential. So that's that one. Let's go to the top of the list. Professional behaviour. What is that all about? Well, as the name suggests, it's about behaving professionally. So it's like following the standards and rules of your industry. Integrity. What is that? That is about honesty, being trustworthy, because if you do that, then people feel they can rely on you. Competence and due care does what it says on the tin, really. Due care is carrying out your work with the right amount of time, resources, etc. And competence is about only accepting work you are capable of doing. And yes, you should turn work down if you are not able to do it. Objectivity is making sure you are free from outside bias when giving an opinion. Lots of potential problems that can arise there. Just a quick one as an example. If you were doing your own brother's tax computations, well, because there is a family link, some people might look at that and assume you're going to try and do your brother a favour and reduce that tax illegally, for example. Okay, so there's a little refresher on ethics before we get into the actual assessment task itself. Let's go and see what this assessment task wants us to do. You work for a small firm of chartered accountants. One of your colleagues has sent you an email saying that he saw one of your clients working at a car wash and it appeared as though the client owned the car wash. Right. Because if one of your clients, so someone who is paying a firm of accountants for advice, was working at a car wash, that doesn't sound like the sort of person who'd typically be paying out money to a firm of professionals. I mean, that's an expensive thing to be paying for if you work at a car wash. Whereas if they're working at the car wash, not cleaning the cars, but running the thing, presumably that's why they thought it was owned, that is a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? You have checked the client's file, and the only business which is being declared to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs is a restaurant. And a restaurant is not a car wash. I have been to one or two restaurants that probably would have been better off trying to be a car wash, but this car wash is not the restaurant, is it? So based on what your colleague has told you, it appears that your client has a second business whose profits are not being declared to the tax authorities. Uh-oh. It then says, using the AAT guidelines, professional conduct in relation to taxation, and that is the reference material that I was talking about that you will have for this task. Explain what steps you should take regarding this possible irregularity. Now notice there are 10 marks available for this. So you've got to put 10 marks of effort in. If you're writing 3 or 4 bullet points and a total of about 20 words, how are you going to earn 10 marks for so little content? And if you look at the examiner's comments for task 1 on personal tax, the main criticism is students who simply don't write enough. It's basically a short set of bullet pointed notes, very little detail, no explanation, and in some cases just copied out of the reference material. Now there is something in the reference material that you can follow when you think there are irregularities. So you can just go and look at that and it will take you through the process. Let's have a look at what you should do. The first thing you should do before making any important decision is always make sure that you establish, in other words, confirm the facts. And if you can't do that, well, that would suggest that your client is not willing to give you all of the information. Well, if you've got a client who won't answer your questions, how can you act for them? Now, I very much doubt that that's going to get you 10 marks, is it? That's not enough. So, what happens next? Let's assume you have the facts. The next thing you've got to consider is how important is this? Is it something fairly trivial? Or does it look important? Now that is a tricky one. There is no firm line in the sand where something fairly small suddenly becomes very important. It's a sliding scale. So you've got to use your experience and you've got to be honest about it with yourself. There is a danger in our industry that accountants who don't want to lose clients therefore don't want to upset clients, and therefore will say, oh, I'm sure it's not that important, and therefore do nothing about something which could be illegal behaviour. If it's trivial, then you don't need to take any further action. If it is not trivial, and it appears to be an irregularity, you should request to the client that they inform HMRC as soon as possible. And you should put that in writing, and you should make sure that that advice includes the penalties, potentially interest charges on late payments, and possibly some sort of default surcharge, especially if this is not the first time that they've caused problems with the tax authorities. If at this point they inform HMRC, well, it's now going to sort itself out and resolve, isn't it? If, on the other hand, they refuse to inform HMRC, then now you will again give them written advice of the potential consequences. Of course, they might ignore those and say, well, if I'm not telling the tax authorities, hopefully they'll never find out. Except I suspect they are going to find out, because you now have to resign from this client because they're being naughty. And you, and be careful with this bit, have to inform HMRC that you have withdrawn from acting for this client. But you don't tell them why. Client confidentiality, remember? But if you're HMRC and a tax advisor has said they have withdrawn from acting for a client, wouldn't that raise some alarm bells and mean you'd probably want to go investigate? And if HMRC come back to you and start investigating, it might be the case that they could have legal powers that force you to give them information. Now, there is potentially something else you'll need to do. Because if you are suspicious that your client is benefiting from the proceeds of a crime, and underpaying tax would be the proceeds of a crime, then you need to inform your money laundering reporting officer at your firm, and the money laundering reporting officer will need to consider if a report to the National Crime Agency, who are the official anti-money laundering authority within the United Kingdom, need to be told. Now that is the process, and you will find that process explained within the regulatory material, the reference material with the rules and stuff in it that you will have for this task. But we don't just want to do that, we need to apply it to the story, and it needs to be sentences. So what sort of stuff would I be writing? Sentences, yes? So I'd say something like this. First, we must establish the true facts. Now, since my colleague has emailed me here, I would ask my colleague for complete details of what they saw, e.g. the location of the car wash. Bear in mind, of course, this could all be an innocent mistake. It might be that your client was getting their car washed. Also, contact client and ask them about the car wash. Now, if that car wash is a registered company, for example, it might be possible to do a company's house search or something along those lines and find out more information. If I cannot get full answers from my client, I will need to consider resignation, as I cannot represent a client who doesn't give me all the facts. So try to add a little bit. Don't just state the process. If you can say why, say why. Always good to add if you can. I would then say that ownership of a business does not appear trivial. I doubt the HMRC would think it was trivial. So I would then say that I would ask the client to report their business to HMRC in writing as soon as possible, and advise client of the likely penalties, interest and surcharges, so that your client has been given full information, full advice. If my client refuses, provide written advice, making clear that you advise them to report it. They are breaking rules by not doing so. And large fines, etc., are likely as a result. And then inform HMRC in writing that you are withdrawing from this client immediately, but don't say why. resign from the client, so you have to tell the client, of course, in writing at once. And report the matter to your money laundering reporting officer and possibly the National Crime Agency due to money laundering suspicions. Now, you might also possibly perhaps want to take some legal advice at this point, because that way you'd be fully prepared, so if HMRC do contact you and start asking confidential questions, you can find out what to do. So there we have it, folks. A nice example of a task 1 from the personal tax assessment paper. Remember what I said at the beginning, and as we were going through it, it's very important that you know what's in the reference material so you can make the best use of it. It's very helpful, lots of helpful stuff in there. This one is written, so make sure that you are writing full sentences, putting a bit of explanation in there. Try and fill that box with writing to your best ability. Try to avoid bullet points with 3 or 4 words. Aim for full sentences. As I said before, the examiner's comments make clear that this is the biggest issue on this task. Thank you very much for watching. Please tune in again next week, same time, same place, for class number 2, and the best of luck with your studies. Thank you.